Hi, welcome to the July 2021 edition of Insight Your Month. I'm Ramanand. I have Harish with me, and we discuss a bunch of articles, books, and other recommendations from our curiosity diet. So, hi, Harish, welcome to this edition.
Hi, Ramanand.
So, Harish, let's start with our pick of article for the month. It's an article called The Next Management Model is from China. And uh, I think we found it intriguing because we haven't heard too much about management models coming from China. It's been dominated by the West. And it tells you, in some sense, how the winds of change are blowing. So this article is about the company Hire and how it decided to create its own management model, which is more of an ecosystem of interconnected forms within an organization. So I think it refers to entrepreneurship. It refers to a completely different way of looking at it, and it has a comparison to an animal. Let you tell us what that animal is.
Yeah, so the animal that is it actually an animal? Yeah, it is an animal that they compare it with is a jellyfish, and I think the interesting parallel that they have drawn there is how jellyfish works like an autonomous body, right? I think that's what they are aiming for, and I think they use this interesting line that in the times of IoT. Everything, including management and organization design, has to change and adapt to these times. I think that was very interesting, sort of similar to holacracy that we have heard of and read about earlier, right, Raman?
That's true, and it's all about networks. It's all about people coming together and disbanding. And I think the jellyfish model, which they call, I think the higher model is called the Ren Dan Hai model, and it's all about how different parts of it can work without always talking to a central processing unit or a leadership in the center. And I think last year we also read a book about, or a couple of books about octopuses and how they are so that entire cephalopod family is so different from what we are used to. And I think people listening or watching this should definitely go and check those alternative models, because we are so used to a certain command and center or a hub and spoke sort of a model, that these autonomous things that are coming through IoT is a good example, like you mentioned. I think they're changing the way we see interactions between people. And so this comes as a very, it just makes you sit and think that, do we have to take all these structures for granted? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about our book of the month, because I see a lot of connections with this article. So the book is called Resilience: Why Things Bounce Back. And because we spoke about holacracy, which is the approach to management, which is, there are no leaders all the time, there are no fixed teams, people come in and go, and there is a purpose that drives all of this. So this is a book called Resilience, which 2020 has seen a use and overuse of this word, but this book was written back in 2012. So I thought it was a good, it is not kind of made for today's moment, or not trying to take lessons and retrofit them. So this 2012 book, takes a look at multiple domains. Coral reefs appear, the world of positive psychology appears, military strategy appears, and they talk about why is it that some systems bounce back, and what is what can we learn from them. And the connection to holacracy that I see is that a lot of these systems that bounce back have the ability to allow for leadership or reorganization at a local level. So imagine that the leadership has been taken out, or you can't communicate with them for some reason. uh, do you have a system where local level people can take the mantle of leadership? And there was this phrase I got introduced to in the book. It's called adhocracy, which is the opposite of bureaucracy, right? So bureaucracy is all about slow but very fixed sort of ways of dealing with the world, and adhocracy is what you do when you have disruptions. So I thought it was a very fascinating book. There's a lot to get through.
Right.
And
So, are you aware, Ramanand, if this book came before or after Bounce by Matthew Syed?
I have a feeling they came around the same time, but not too far apart either way.
Yeah, and both seem to be talking about very similar, topics and areas.
That's true. And because Matthew Syed comes from the world of sports, I think a lot of, if you put all these things together, you get a very rich set of examples and analogies. Because I think with a lot of resilience, the danger is to only look at something like healthcare or look at companies. But these actually tell you how there is resilience in so many different complex systems that are around us. And there are references to things like red teaming, which is something that we have encountered in the past as well. So definitely a book worth delving into. So for you to prepare yourself, and the message always is, these are not books that you read when you're going through a crisis. It is something that you do years, if not months, years and decades
Right.
before the big disruption.
Right.
All right. So since we spoke briefly about networks and getting rewired and resilience, so I think our next book summary also comes from that world. So over to you for our book summary of the month.
Yeah, so I'm seeing a very deliberate thread that is connecting all our picks today. In fact, even the later picks that we have in store today, there's some connection to whatever we have spoken till now, and that's interesting because that was not very deliberate, right? So the book summary that I wanted to pick was the book Live Wired, and it talks about the brain. It is written by Dr. Eagleman, who is, I think, works at Stanford University. And the book presents such interesting anecdotes. It talks about how so many people started seeing the logo of IBM in a different color. And I think the one line that I take away from that summary is that the brain is the greatest piece of technology that the world has seen. And I think it's a very important takeaway there, right? That the brain adapts based on what's important to it. Talk about everything that we have seen and heard about, whatever you measure gets improved and all those things. It all comes from that that mother source of technology, the greatest piece of technology that we have, which is the brain. And that's how we've been operating and flourishing over many generations.
Yeah, and I also see the connection to efforts of getting people interested in a topic, making something sticky in the minds of people. Um, I also, happen to read something else which chimes in with what you just said about the brain only caring or shaping itself to what it impacts itself. Is that your brain is actually designed to forget things and not to retain every piece of information that comes to it. So, the job of a leader or someone who's trying to influence something in the minds of others have to keep this in mind, that how do you make this important enough for that other person? So that is where the role of emotion, that is the role of storytelling, all those kinds of things perhaps you can bring to bear to this problem.
Right.
So from that, let's go to our smartcast of the month. This is comes from the world of the armed forces, something that we again sort of talked about a little while earlier. So tell me about the smartcast of the month.
Right. So the smartcast of the month is the one that I recorded with Colonel Vembu Shankar, who's an Indian Army veteran, and he's also a Shaurya Chakra awardee. And when you mentioned that you should be reading books years in advance, I was reminded of one of his favorite lines, which is the more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war, which is also, I think, a line that the NDA prides itself about. So for me, the fascinating part was about asking Colonel Shankar about the organization structure of the Indian Army, right? I mean, from the outside, it looks like bureaucracy, right? A very firm structure, and there is a very clear chain of command, which there is. So, Mike, I was actually asking him about one of the operations that he was helming, for which he won the Shaurya Chakra, about how information flows, and were they able to take these kind of calls on the ground, and those calls are like calls it's a matter of life and death for either themselves or the enemy, right? So he gave me a very nice term. He said, what is the area of influence? And we've heard this in a slightly differently worded way, even from the likes of Warren Buffett and Graham, where they talk about circle of influence, right? So knowing your area of influence, what is it that you can actually influence? makes a big difference in, this entire chain of command that we're talking about. How much information that you need to know. Again, we joke about it, that are you on a need to know basis? I think primarily from Hollywood films, but I'm sure it makes a big difference in terms of keeping things clear, right? The simpler that it gets, the easier it is to take decisions and do things in a better manner. So that was a big part of the conversation that I had. But I also spoke to him about his various passions, including his passion for collecting autographs, and how he has ambushed celebrities like Magnus Carlsen, Pele, and it shows a lot about the amount of diligence that goes into all the work that he does, and even the project someone work that he's doing currently.
Right. And, for a lot of people listening to this, they may not know what, I mean, I count myself in that we don't really know how something that rigid a structure, how to operate under that. We are so used to this, liberty to change track almost overnight. Pivot, you can call it. I think they don't have the luxury of pivoting, but they also are allowed to make these very short, immediately tactical calls when the need be. So the higher level purpose is so clearly defined there that so I think what you're trying to call out is that uh, both all these ends of the spectrum, they have their right place in the right context. They are not in opposition to each other. And because even a book like Resilience talks about a lot of strategies that have emerged out of military thinking, uh, and part of that is to be able to empower people to take the right decision. So much for us to learn, even though we may not see us in that rigid mold, but also how the army itself, I think, does keep pace with change, right? That's also
Right.
a fascinating part of your conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's your pick for the podcast, Ramanan?
Okay, so this pick is a little out there because
Right.
uh, you know uh, a lot of times the circle of competence that you mentioned a short while ago, a lot of our picks are in that circle of competence, and once in a while something will come along and force us to stretch that. So our podcast for the month is David Deutsch, the theoretical physicist, on Conversations with Tyler. So like with most of the episodes on that podcast, as soon as you get in, you're just thrown into the deep end. You are not given a kind of smooth glide path to understanding who this is. So immediately, David Deutsch and Tyler Cowen start talking about Star Trek and quantum physics and
17
whatnot.
universes.
Yeah, so I think the reason I recommend this podcast is because it really helps to stretch your mind, bring a lot of different ideas. David Deutsch is a classic professor, the Oxford theoretical physicist with gray, silvery hair, with a lot of interesting things that come really quickly at you. Uh, and I've heard about him, but this is the first time I've heard, listened to him. And immediately I went into a rabbit hole. So he's got a couple of things that he talks often about, including the philosophy of science and the role of knowledge, the role of something called as great explanations that have propelled, make humanity a force in the universe. So even if you are not going to be there tomorrow, your idea may change the world. And so for a lot of people who are a little pessimistic about humanity, it's like the Douglas Adams view of being a very minor speck on a undistinguished planet at the boring end of the solar system. This is actually the opposite view. He takes the view that we are actually very important to the universe. So I would recommend it to a lot of people just to kind of, if not blow your mind, to just kind of you know put a few bullets and they will pop out at some point. One interesting thing that he talks about is people should teach disobedience in school. So that was something that I'm trying to watch his TED talk, read his book. So uh, very curious episode. So do check it out, Harish, if you haven't already.
Yeah, I'm halfway through it, and it's already a fascinating listen. So I'll try to finish that today, and be obedient with this request of yours at least.
So I was just reading somewhere else that he said, how would you test for disobedience in schools, right? Maybe you get extra marks for not taking the exam. on disobedience. So there's a lot of fun stuff there.
Yeah.
So let's close with our future ring question. And the question is about, apart from the environment and investing, which fields can we study to understand up-leveling and future relevance better? So based on what we've spoken about, do any of these fields come to your mind as good answers to this question?
Yeah, all these fields, right? Whether it's sports, whether it is nature, is always the best teacher that we have. We really don't have to worry about any man-made pursuits to actually start thinking about. There are enough examples in nature that we just need to uh, look at with an open mindset, and we'll get everything that we need to pick up about studying any topic. And future relevance, I think nature has sustained for so many generations. I'm sure we can pick up something from the world of nature. So everything from jellyfish to the brain, and to the Indian Army, or sports, all of these are great sources for us to learn about future relevance.
Right. And I'm sure our forthcoming edition will feature many more of these fields. So on that note, Harish, thank you so much. We'll get back in a month's time.
Thank you, Ramadan.